Now, to talk a little bit more about Zika and to get a virologist's perspective on the Zika situation is Dr. Vincent Racaniello. Dr. Racaniello is, of course, a Columbia University professor of microbiology and immunology, and he's an educator online, too. If you check out the website, Virology blog at virology.ws, you can get a lot of good stuff there. Dr. Racaniello, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Hi, Robert. Good to be here.
Yes, sir. It's been a couple months at least, and I know you're up in New York, but you know what's happening down here in Florida.
Sure do.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and start by getting your thoughts on the local transmission in Florida, and then kind of give me more of a big picture thought of what you're thinking.
So as you well know, Robert, it's thought that there's been some local transmission of Zika virus in Miami, and I think there are 15 people who are believed to have gotten infection locally. That is, they were bitten by mosquitoes that carry the virus. They didn't travel anywhere where Zika is endemic. They haven't contacted people who have Zika. So the idea is that they have acquired it by mosquito bites there in Miami. Now, usually you try and isolate virus from mosquitoes to really prove that this is happening. And as far as I understand, so far they have been testing mosquitoes in Miami for Zika virus, and it's all been negative so far.
Yes.
So until we get that, I would say it sounds highly likely that there's local transmission, but you need to see virus from mosquitoes.
Now, some people were saying that without that piece of information, you need that piece of information for proof to act on this outbreak. Did you agree with that?
No, I don't think so. I think we should preempt and start, doing mosquito control. Limiting travel just happened, as you probably know, and unprecedented. CDC says don't go there.
Sure.
Informing people of how they should behave. I think that's totally appropriate. You shouldn't wait because, as I said, it's highly likely that this is being transmitted locally, but we'd like to have some proof of it. It's not really surprising. We've been talking about this for months now, whether it would be transmitted locally. Aedes aegypti is present there in Florida. It's present in Miami. It's known to carry Zika virus. And we know that there have been a few outbreaks of dengue in Florida caused by local transmission by that mosquito. So it's not surprising that Zika has come and done this. There's so many people coming into the country carrying Zika virus from other areas. It's being delivered on a regular basis. I think there are something like 1,600 imported cases into the continental U.S., so lots of virus coming in, lots of people carrying it, and of course they're being bitten. So it was just a matter of time before it was spread. The real question is it going to spread even more, and is it going to go to other parts of the country? And of course, I don't have a crystal ball, and it's hard to predict things. But again, we can get lessons from dengue. Dengue is present in many parts of the world where Zika is. 50 to 100 million infections a year. It's constantly being brought in to the United States. We have lots of imported cases, but it rarely spreads. The last few outbreaks were in Florida, I think a couple of years ago. There was one in Texas in 2005, but they're pretty small, 100 people or so or less, and they don't really spread. So if you ask me what's going to happen, I can't really say, but if we take lessons from dengue, I'd say these will be relatively restricted and they're not going to go very far.
Well, I would even turn the clock back a couple years when we saw chikungunya fly through South and Central America and the Caribbean, and we had tons of travel-associated cases here, but only, I think, about a dozen or so local transmission, all here in Florida.
Right.
So, so we do a good job of mosquito control and containment and all that.
And also our lifestyle is different. We use air conditioning and screens.
Sure.
We're inside most of the time, right? So I think these make a big difference.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit about politics. It's something I try to avoid on this show, but sometimes it comes up. And let me start with this. Now, you wrote on your blog about that Congress failed on Zika. because they never passed I imagine you wrote it because they never passed the emergency funding bill of $1.9 billion. So
right.
Give me your thoughts on that.
All right. So it's quite clear that Zika is a global threat. It's been spreading. The extent of its threat to the U.S. Isn't clear, but I like to liken it to yellow fever. If you travel somewhere, we don't have yellow fever here in the U.S., but if you travel somewhere that has yellow fever, you get a yellow fever vaccine. So, we need money to make vaccines, do some research, help the CDC take care of it, and I think Congress dropped the ball by not appropriating this money. So I asked Harold Varmus last week. I happened to have him on my show, and he was the former NIH director. I said, why didn't Congress give money for Zika virus? And he said, well, this is complicated. The first problem is there's hostility between Congress and the administration, and that limits everything. But some people say it's too much money, although we don't know what the right amount of money is. And they quote the 2009 influenza epidemic when Congress voted to give a lot of money to influenza. We didn't use it all, so they said you don't need that much money. And so basically, and also the other thing, which I forget to add here, is that they added other things to the bill which had nothing to do with Zika, so it wasn't a clean bill, and therefore the bill was blocked. I think if it had been a Zika bill alone, it might have done better, but it's unfortunate that it gets caught up with politics. And Varmus actually suggested that we should have an emergency medical fund of a couple of $2 billion that the president and Tony Fauci and other people could say, we need this money when there's an emergency like Zika.
Yeah, that's interesting because today I saw Fauci say that they started the human trials with the DNA vaccine, and I saw a tweet where he's saying that they may run out of money and won't be able to finish the trials, or it may affect it.
I mean, he's gotten money to do this vaccine work. I suspect he's taken some of it from Ebola.
Yeah.
And he's been very creative, but he needs help. He needs more money.
Yeah. All right. Well, have you been keeping track at all what's going on in Florida? I mean, what grade do you give the Florida Department of Health?
Well, I don't know what you mean by keeping track, but so far I think the information they've gotten out is pretty good. I think they've responded properly and appropriately. Yeah.
And even Frieden's been out giving them kudos several times. So, hat tip to them. All right, back to virology. Now, the last time you were on the show, Dr. Racaniello, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, we were talking about the sexual transmission of Zika, and at the time you didn't seem very convinced based on the research that was out there. Has anything changed since that last interview?
Not really very much. There are now, I think, in the U.S., the CDC says there are 15 or 16 what they call sexually transmitted cases and these are out of the 1,600 imported cases that have come into the country. But again, here's the problem. Because you can find virus not only in blood, but saliva, urine, semen, vaginal secretions, it's really hard to prove that if two people are together and there's no mosquitoes involved, that it was sexual transmission. And I want to underscore the case in Utah where there was apparent transmission of Zika from an elder gentleman who became ill, and his caregiver, a young lady who was taking care of him, she got infected.
Right.
She was fine. He unfortunately died. They don't know how that was transmitted, but if she's taking care of him and handling a bedpan, it's easy to see how she could be infected, especially if she has open cuts and so forth. So I think it's really hard to know if it's sexual transmission or close contact. That's my basically beef. Now, I think it's fine to be careful, right?
Sure.
But at this point, remember, the case numbers are really low that fit this close personal contact transmission mode. But we need more information still to say it's sexually transmitted.
Would it be safe to suggest that, but say Brazil, we have no clue how many of those could have been sexually transmitted, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in an area where the virus is circulating, or if you're with someone who's infected, Absolutely, be careful.
Yeah.
But having safe sex may not prevent transmission. It could be that, saliva or urine is going to transmit it as well. So, most of these cases, and there's some case reports in the literature, they say there are no mosquitoes around, so it must be sex. And I just think that's not right. It could be sex, but it could also be other fluids, right?
Yeah. All right. Well, something you did really interesting on the blog recently, virology.ws, was you did this video concerning the Zika vaccine. Mm-hmm. And I loved listening to it. And so I guess what I want you to do, if you can tell my audience, what's the progress on the Zika vaccine? There's a bunch of companies working on it, and on different types too, I imagine, right? And yeah. So what's the progress on the vaccine? Well,
according to the Wall Street Journal, 15 different companies are working on Zika vaccines. And this is probably going to be a big deal. I think a lot of travelers in the U.S. are going to get it, and lots of people overseas. So many people are going to receive this vaccine. A paper was published just a couple of weeks ago showing the effect of a DNA vaccine against Zika virus in mice. So in a DNA vaccine, you take a DNA copy of the viral gene that you think is important for protection. In the case of Zika virus, it's the gene encoding the surface protein on the virus, which we call the E protein, and one other protein from the virus as well. You put that into a DNA, a plasmid, and you simply give that to people. There's actually a DNA gun that pushes the DNA into your muscle. There's no needle involved. It pushes the DNA in. Mm-hmm. The DNA gets into cells, makes proteins, and those stimulate an immune response. It's a great technology. Unfortunately, no DNA vaccine has been licensed in people. There is a DNA vaccine against West Nile for horses, and it's been tested a lot. Now, in that paper, they protected mice from Zika infection with this DNA vaccine. And now, as you mentioned earlier, a DNA vaccine, a similar DNA vaccine developed by the NIAID, Tony Fauci's branch of NIH, is going to go into phase 1 in people to test to make sure it's safe and to see if it gives an immune response against the virus. So that's a DNA-based vaccine. Now, of course, it's hard to know what the other companies are doing, but the NIH is very forthcoming. If you go to its website, you can find out all the other vaccines that it's developing. It's working on an RNA vaccine, actually, where they take, instead of DNA, they take RNA and it's put into muscle, and that kind of amplifies itself. They're also making a live attenuated Zika vaccine. Now, the polio vaccine that's being used to eradicate polio, the Sabin vaccine, is a live attenuated vaccine. Mm-hmm. It's infectious, but it's been engineered so it doesn't cause disease. So the NIH or the NIAID has been researching a similar vaccine for dengue, and the new Zika vaccine that they're developing is based on that. They're also making an inactivated Zika virus vaccine. So the other polio vaccine, the Salk vaccine, is an inactivated vaccine where you take infectious virus, you treat it with chemicals so it's no longer infectious, and then you inject it. That's being developed at NIAID as well, and they're planning some phase 1 trials this fall with that vaccine. And finally, another vaccine NIAID is developing, very similar to the Ebola vaccine that was tested in West Africa last year. Mm-hmm. They take an animal virus, vesicular stomatitis virus, and they substitute one of its genes with the gene for the surface protein, the E protein of Zika virus. And that vaccine for Ebola looked really good last year, so this is being developed for Zika, and it's in early preclinical stages in animals. So NIAID is really doing the job here, and I commend Tony Fauci for doing all this with the little money that he has.
All right, well, good. Yeah, a lot of activity going on in the Zika virus circles. Let me go ahead and switch gears, Dr. Racaniello, and Zika Diaries, something I introduced to my audience a couple months ago. You can look at it. It's if you just Google search Zika Diaries, it's right at the top,
Probably the first time in my life that's happened.
But it's good stuff. And here you described the startup of a Zika lab after years of researching polio. And so I got about 5 minutes with you, Vincent. What are the latest exciting things your lab is doing? Any discoveries made? And, of course, I love to hear about the stumbling blocks you encounter.
Well, so we started at the beginning of this year. We had to get viruses. That was hard because a lot of people don't want to share their Zika viruses. But fortunately, the government set up a company called BEI Resources that distributes virus. You can get almost any strain you want there. So we've collected quite a few of them. We learned how to grow it. We learned how to do plaque assays. And then we wanted to do some mouse experiments. We want to basically ask, in a pregnant mouse, if you infect the mother, will the virus cross the placenta? Will it get into the fetus? And will it cause birth defects like we see in people? Boy, did it take a long time for us to get our mouse protocols approved here. You have to go through a lot of paperwork at a place like this. It took us a long time. We finally got our mice just a few weeks ago, and we're about to do an experiment where we're infecting them with Zika virus. So stay tuned for that. We should know what's going on in a few weeks. Now, the other thing we've been doing, there happens to be, I got a call about 3 months ago from a scientist here at Columbia. He said, "Hey, I hear you're working on Zika." He said, "I work on microcephaly. Maybe we should get together." I didn't even know that he worked on it. His name is Richard Valley. It turns out that there's a lot of microcephaly, which has nothing to do with an infectious agent. It's caused by genetic mutations.
Sure.
And these mutations affect the way the neurons develop in the fetus. And this laboratory has developed really interesting ways to use mice to study microcephaly. And basically, we're collaborating with them to use a mouse model. And what we do is we take out mice at different ages of development. We make slices of the developing brain. We put them in culture, and then we infect them with Zika virus. And he knows exactly what goes on in mice that leads to genetic microcephaly, and we're going to see if the virus does the same thing. And so we've done a few infections. We stain these slices. They look beautiful. And perhaps in a couple of weeks we'll be ready to submit a paper describing our findings. And so that's gone really well. And I think it's a great illustration of how you have to collaborate in science. You can't do everything yourself. Here's a person who's an expert in microcephaly. I can do virology. You put them together, you can get a lot of interesting results. So for the first time in a long time, I'm really excited about lab work.
Oh, good. Always exciting. Let me ask you, get off topic briefly, but we are talking about microcephaly. Why is there not a lot of attention to CMV concerning these issues? Because it appears like the numbers are just astronomically more.
Yeah, CMV, even rubella, causes a lot of birth, and we have a vaccine against rubella. I actually met an investigator at ASM a couple of weeks ago. There was a Zika virus meeting. Her name is Lenore Pereira. She works out at UCSF in San Francisco, and she's been working on CMV-induced birth defects for many, many years. So there is actually a big community doing that, trying to figure out how the virus causes that and how to prevent it. Right now we don't have a vaccine against CMV, but that's a goal because it's a really important pathogen. She, of course, immediately jumped to Zika and is using all of her knowledge to study that and just published a lovely paper on it. But there is quite a bit of research going on in CMV. It's a tough one to crack. It's a difficult virus.
Mm-hmm. And you just don't hear much about it. You have to kind of dig for it to find out that, yes, there's 400 fetal deaths a year. And
so that's the thing that kind of stunned me when Zika hit the scene. Everyone got all upset that it's causing microcephaly, but we do have lots of other viruses out there that do this. Now, they may not be transmitted by mosquitoes, so maybe that's the difference. Maybe they're not new, and that's the difference as well. But you're absolutely right. They don't get a lot of attention.
Yeah. Okay. One quick question, 30 seconds, Vincent. How concerned are you about the fact that so many of these patients are asymptomatic? Is that a bigger problem for epidemiologists as far as tracking this thing? Zika.
Well, I think that if we can develop some good diagnostic tests, it's not a problem. And I'll just remind you that polio is symptomatic in only 1 in 100 infections.
Oh,
right?
I didn't know that.
And
Okay.
we were able to take care of that with a vaccine. So it kind of makes it difficult to track infections, but if you do eventually get a vaccine, it takes care of it.
All right. Again, thank you, Dr. Vincent Racaniello, for your time and expertise, and it's always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, Robert. See you in a couple of months.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye.
All right.